Hello there. Good morning to you, good afternoon to you, and good evening to you from wherever you are joining me from. It is Mayegun live, and it is also the continuation of our reading, Why We Struck. So, if you are waking up this morning to this, please share the broadcast. Invite your friends, invite your not so friendly friends, and tell them that we have continued. Let's see. Yesterday, when we started reading this, Why We Struck by Adewale Ademoyega, the vivid account of what led to the first coup in Nigeria and those behind it, as well as their motive and what went wrong. This is such a vital piece of history that although the system had managed to use propaganda to change the entire story to different worthless kind of narratives. But accounts like these are very, very important. Many people have read this book, and many have heard about it, and they've never read it. Many who read this book years ago, some are like, I want it again, because somehow it is something that helps conscious minds to remain conscious and never gullible enough for the career criminals in Nigeria, successive career criminals in Nigeria, to ever be manipulated. They will never be manipulated. Yesterday, we are now sort of updated to why and the events that led to the January 15, 1966 coup. The narrative continues. Please share this. And if you are somehow doing something, you can actually continue doing what you are doing. You don't need to sit there and watch. Okay? If you have, you know what I mean. Well, thank you so much. So let us continue from where we stopped yesterday. And if there is any issue with the audio that I should know about, kindly bring it to my attention. Every half an hour, I will take a look at the comments so that I can know, if I am still communicating or not. So thank you so much. Let us continue. And this is the account of Major Adewale Ademoyega, the third person among the plotters of the first coup. Thank you. So let's continue for those who have been following. So I'm just going to continue from page 84. And this is me reading. Even among those earmarked for arrest, only 4 were Northerners, 2 were Westerners, and 2 were Easterners. But the North had always had more than 50% of the intake of officers into the army since 1961, and more than 70% of the intake of the other ranks. What is that? Sorry. Let's hope that fixes that sound a little bit. So therefore, if casualties were to happen, it was more likely to be in the proportion than anything else. I mean, in that proportion than anything else. The wicked propaganda that followed the coup was only made possible by the weakness and non-revolutionary principles of the Ironsi regime, which bore no semblance to the well-ordered and well-controlled government that was envisaged and could have been run by us if our plans were fully executed. Ironsi was supposed to be arrested. The coup, the plotters, they wanted Ironsi arrested. They wanted, in fact, they said they didn't have any plan of killing anyone. The plan was to arrest some of the top shots across the country, including in the military. Finally, it was unanimously agreed at that meeting that the coup should be staged simultaneously in all the regional capitals of the Federation. To this end, since there were no troops stationed in Benin, the Midwest capital, a small unit was to be sent from Enugu to put the plan into effect therein. Nzeogu was named as the commander for North, Hugh Soke for the East and Midwest, Ife Juna and I for Lagos and West, respectively. They need to bring more of the middle level officers, majors and lieutenant colonels into the planning and execution of the coup was discussed. But the few names that could be mentioned had to be dropped because their interpersonal connections would compromise the security of the planning. After 90 minutes of discussion, the meeting was over. We dispersed as if from a prayer meeting, since it was a Sunday and the Lord was in our midst. I drove Nzeogu back to Abeokuta, where he picked up his vehicle and journeyed back to the north the same day. That was how the meeting went. That was how our journey that began over the years developed and culminated in mutual friendship and trust. In the course of time, our common ideas had been gradually formed and trimmed even before the first and only formal meeting. Who stayed where and who did what was entirely decided according to our army postings, over which none of us had any control. All we did was to find officers on the spot who could act according to our plan, our principles. Who took part was entirely determined by the response of individual officers to our revolutionary call. They didn't even call it coup. Those plotters, they didn't even see it as coup. They believed that they were carrying out a revolution. And it would have been a revolution, not a coup d'etat like is recorded. It is, therefore, extremely impudent of Major General Alexandra Madebo to say, as he did in his book, that Major Nzeogu selected for his Lagos operation, Majors Ife Juna, Anuforo, Okafor, and Ademoyega, who had personal grievances against various senior military commanders. Well, personally, I had no grievances against any senior military commander. And if I may ask, are coup staged merely because of grievances against certain officers? Were the postings in the Nigerian army done to enable aggrieved officers to be in Lagos for the coup? Madebo claimed that he was consulted before the coup. His response was neither principled nor patriotic, but rather tribalistic, and it would have been most unfortunate for Nigeria if every officer were of his type. And can one not conclude from his book that it was unfortunate for the revolution to have had him, Madebo, close to and advising Nzeogu soon after the coup? Is it not obvious to all that he, Madebo, did not even understand the principles and objectives of the revolution, let alone the processes of preparation for and execution of the first phase thereof?
After the one and only formal meeting of mid-November 1965, much devolved on Unzeogu, Ifeajuna, and myself. There was no more meeting of all the officers. But from time to time, 2 or 3 of us simply met to sort out some of the details of our preparation. I traveled to the north several times to see Unzeogu. On one occasion, we did a reconnaissance together of the various locations that must be taken over on the D-Day. When we were to reconnoiter the Sadaunos castle, Unzeogu suggested that we should take a lady with us so that we would seem to be visitors to Kaduna. I hurriedly went to town and invited a lady. She was to turn up at the officers' mess after closing at work. It was a Saturday. She failed to turn up at the right time and we could not postpone. So we set out. As Unzeogu was about to regret that the girl did not make it, we found another girl who went with us on the reconnaissance. Then Unzeogu laughed and said that when the coup would have been successfully accomplished, the disappointing girl would regret her failure to have joined on this trip. I also laughed, but the new lady had no clue about what we said, since we told her that we were only enjoying a Saturday afternoon drive. As a result of this reconnaissance, we discovered that the Premier's Lodge was totally separated from the Visitors' Lodge and conference hall adjacent to it. We also observed that the Premier's Lodge was apparently impregnable, having only one massive gate and no other entrance. Unless the gate was opened officially, no one would gain an entrance without blowing off the gate. Only a high-caliber tactical weapon like the 84mm Carl Gustav could be used to blow up the massive iron gate. Hence, Unzeogu knew that he had to launch a real attack on the lodge before gaining entry into it. On another visit to Kaduna in December, Unzeogu asked me to impress it on Ifeajuna to organize an internal security exercise, which would bring troops together in Lagos in a way similar to what he had organized in Kaduna. We could then safely use those troops on the D-Day. I conveyed this point to Ifeajuna and he actually attempted it, but he was immediately cautioned by his commander, Brigadier Maimalari. It was thus obvious that rehearsals were not possible in Lagos as they were in Kaduna. The battle group course went on without a hitch in Abeokuta until the first week of December 1965. There were 20 student officers on the course, all captains. I indoctrinated and orientated them towards the revolutionary thought concept. I also held personal interviews with all of them. I took the whole group on an official reconnaissance of all the strategic installations in Lagos, and I taught them how important positions could be held or defended in time of war or other military actions. This was acknowledged as a very successful exercise, and the student officers were particularly happy that they were being introduced to the practical aspects of their defensive duties. If the coup took place before the course ended, many of the officers would have carried out any duty allotted to them without looking back, and our Lagos operation would have been as successful as the Kaduna operation came to be. But the course ended and both the student officers and the troops dispersed before a date could be fixed for the coup. Hence, the usefulness of the troops and the availability of the student officers was lost to us. And this was one of the crucial factors that made all the difference between our Lagos and Kaduna operations. Nonetheless, of the 20 student officers, only 3 came out top as regards their capability and response to revolutionary ideas and practices. These were Captains Abisoye, Captain Bullier, Captain Ewanya. Incidentally, Abisoye was also the highest rated student on the course. When the course was ended and student officers returned to their units, only Guli went to Kaduna and did eventually take part in the coup under Nzeogu. The first blow to our plan came in early December when it became known that Major Gude Soke, our strongman in Enugu, was soon to depart for India on a course. We were not sure how soon it would go. If it was to be in the new year, we might have staged the coup before his departure. But if he departed before the coup, it will leave us with a big problem. It will not be easy to find a substitute, since the captains and majors of the battalion had proved irresponsive. Soke made efforts to postpone his departure for as long as possible, and our normal preparations continued. Exercise Damisa. As was earlier explained, it was not possible to organize rehearsals for the coup in Lagos, but this was possible in Kaduna. Therefore, exercise Damisa was planned and organized by Nzeogu. Damisa is the Hausa word for leopard. In African folk tales, a leopard could change the color of his skin, and that was what the exercise was about. The continuous training of officers and men had always been a feature of life in the armed forces. What made exercise Damisa special was not that it was a night exercise. That was normal. But that it was also designed to serve an additional and peculiar purpose. That purpose was not explained to the majority of the officers and men taking part in the exercise until D-Day. There had been many daylight exercises with the same troops at the rehearsal of the night exercise on January 14, 1966. Actually, the command of the NMTC was vested in Colonel R. Shodende, but from September 1965, he had been appointed as the deputy commandant of the Nigerian Defense Academy in Kaduna. Prior to that, Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi had been posted to NMTC from the 1st Battalion, Enugu. Since he was to run the battleground course, he moved to Abeokuta at the beginning of September 1965. Consequently, Nzeogu, who was the chief instructor of the NMTC in Kaduna, was also acting as his commandant and was therefore able to plan his own exercises and adjust the dates, as we were forced to shift the date of the coup from time to time. The movement of the political and military personnel whose availability was important to the staging of the coup was responsible for the frequent shift in the date of the coup. We particularly spread out our nets to get information on the movement of the relevant persons. It was no mean task to piece together available information on their movements and work out a date when the most important ones will be in their respective domains. Added to this was the problem of synchronizing the dates for all the regional capitals. Military communication had to be sparingly used, and personal contact proved to be more and more necessary. Meanwhile, the political situation was getting worse throughout the country. Riots staged, especially in the West, but also in Lagos and in the Benue province of the North. The Balewa government was inefficient. It failed completely to find solutions to the problems of the nation. Gradually, life became more and more unsafe. Motorists were waylaid, killed, and their vehicles set on fire. Political opponents were killed and their houses burned. But Balewa pretended that all was normal and under control throughout the country. He even found time to host a meeting of the prime ministers of the Commonwealth for the purpose of discussing the unilateral declaration of independence by Ian Smith of Zimbabwe. While that conference went on, riots, arson, and looting claimed people's lives and property, even inside Lagos metropolis. After the battle group course in Abeokuta, the instructing staff dispersed on holidays. I stayed at the officers' mess, Apapa, where I was to spend part of my holidays. A holiday with a difference on account of the coup. I had promised to keep in touch with Lieutenant Colonel Fajuri, who stayed for a while in Abeokuta. However, as Christmas approached, he departed for his hometown in Ekiti, and I was no longer able to keep in touch with him till the coup was staged. Throughout December, we were on the alert and poised to act if the dates could click. I took a few days to relax at Takwa Bay when Ifeajuna suddenly came to me on December 27, bringing me news of the movement of the important personalities around Lagos and a flight ticket to Kaduna. Very early the following day, I crossed to Lagos and was soon at Ikeja en route to Kaduna. The dates did not click because the leaders in the north were flying to Mecca for the Umrah Hajj in the opening days of the new year. So I returned to Takwa Bay. NNA planned to wallop the West. It was at this time that I met Chief H.O. Davis for the first time. He was a famous politician who had been in the nationalist struggle since 1941. He was then a federal minister in the Balewa government and had come to spend the New Year holidays at his retreat just behind the Army Chalet at Tekwa Bay. I discovered him just by chance. I had gone to the back of the chalet and was attracted by the presence of a lady standing in the adjacent compound. As I moved closer, I saw a gentleman sitting nearby. I had a second look and I thought I could recognize that person. I greeted him and I asked if he was Chief Davis, and he said yes. I soon got into deep conversation with him on the political situation in the country. I was particularly interested to know what the federal government's views was. Apart from Balewa's public statements, Chief Davis made it clear to me that the federal government had no solution to the political crisis. He said that everybody was just waiting to see what will happen next, and that nobody knew exactly what that would be. But surely something was bound to happen. I left Chief Davis feeling that the Balewa government has something up his sleeve. Otherwise, the minister would not be so emphatic that something was bound to happen. When I returned to the officers' mess, Apapa, on January 3rd, 1966, I went to work with Ifeajuna. After extensive prodding, we discovered that Balewa government had a terrible plan to bring the army fully to operate in the West for the purpose of eliminating the elites of that region, especially the intellectuals who were believed to be behind the intransigence of people against the Akintola government. It was for this reason that the government had attacked the intellectuals of the region, especially those at Ife, intimidating and victimizing them for their refusal to support it. People like Tai Sholari of Mayflower School, Ikene, were among those marked down. It was also intended that if the plan succeeded in the West, the next target would be the East. The federal government was to use loyal troops for this purpose, and the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Lagema, and the 2nd Battalion in Ikeja, temporarily commanded by Major Igboba, but soon to be taken over by Lieutenant Colonel Gowon, were designated for this assignment. I want to take a quick break and say something before I miss that. Did you hear that name? Tafawa Balewa's government, according to this coup plotters record, from their own discovery, Tafawa Balewa's government was planning to eliminate the intelligentsias of the West, Yorubas. And once they are done, they were going to move to the East, destroy and kill and remove all of their intelligentsias too. Okay? And whatever other agenda was can further be foisted on us. And Gowon was recruited for that. And Gowon finally carried out the genocide anyway, but this time around, not on the Yorubas, but on the Biafrans. Then you will say the Igbos, the Jaws, the Efiks, the BPOs, everyone from that part of the old Eastern region, they lost over 5 million people under Gowon, who later became head of state and led Nigeria to the civil war. Just be mindful of that, all right? So Gowon was recruited for a genocide anyway, but the genocide, by the way, wasn't meant to be against the people per se, but against those who they considered as intelligent people, outspoken people, or that, and they wanted to use the army for that. Let us continue. The break is over. The operation was fixed for the 3rd week of January 1966, when the Sardauna would have returned from his pilgrimage, and Lieutenant Colonel Gowon would have completed his takeover of the Ikeja battalion. In preparation for this horrible move by the federal government, the high echelons of the army and the police were being reshuffled. Major General Ironsi was ordered to proceed on leave from mid-January. He was to be relieved by Brigadier Maimalari over the head of Brigadier Ademoyega. Lieutenant Colonel Ujoku was temporarily command 2nd Brigade headquarters at Apapa. In the police force, Inspector General Idet was sent on leave from December 20, 1965. The officer closest to him was retired, and the 3rd officer, Alhaji Kam Salem, was brought in as the new Inspector General. The stage was thus set for the proper walloping up of Obga rioters of the West. From our own stance, this proposed whipping of the West was a most dastardly plan. Anuforo, Onwatuegu, and I had each in turn commanded the troops in Makurdi against the TV rioters who were opposed to the high-handedness and oppression of the Sardauna government of the North. We knew from practical experience that it was not force that was being used to reconcile people, but the individual commanders' ability to come to terms with them. This was the reason why some of us achieved more success than others in reducing the fierceness of the encounters. For instance, in the period that I commanded the detachment from May to July 1965, there was no single civilian casualty. But before me and soon afterwards, things were very much different. Final preparation. In view of this, we had to move fast, but also with much caution, as the atmosphere was intensely charged, both politically and militarily. In such a circumstance, discussions with other officers had to be carefully made. Yet there was one arrangement that we had left till date was fixed. It was the arrangement for the release of political prisoners, particularly Ifawolowo. Now that our own date had been tentatively fixed for mid-January, it became necessary to gear up that arrangement. At the end of the 1st week in January, Major Anuforo and I arranged to meet Captain Udiaja, a young engineering graduate from the Royal Military College of Science, Shrivenham, UK. I don't even know I'm hearing that for the first time. I'm actually seeing that for the first time, so I don't know how to pronounce that. So I'll just say Shrivenham, UK. We met in Major Chukwuka's house at the Ikeja cantonment, but Chukwuka himself was not there. Having briefed Udeaja generally and got his consent, we gave him his task. He was to fly in a special plane provided for the purpose to Calabar on the morning of the D-Day to effect the release of Chief Awolowo and bring him to Lagos on the plane. We had already arranged for a plane of the Nigerian Air Force to be made available for that morning. This was done through Major Unzeogu, not Unzeogu of the Air Force. The captain was to be assisted by a young officer on the D-Day. Udeaja accepted this task and soon left Anuforo and I to continue with our discussions. About 20 minutes later, Anuforo suddenly gripped me and said, "Look, Wale, there is nothing stopping Udeaja from revealing the whole plan to Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Unegbe, with whom he was known to be quite close. Of course, Unegbe would have immediately given the whole plan to Brigadier Maimalari, who in turn would have related everything to Balewa. In the twinkling of